Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks to all the organizers for keeping this together and still having this program today. I'm very happy to be here with you. The title of this talk is Charles White, Feminist at Mid-Century, and it's part of a larger celebration we see going on around the country of this artist. Of course, the Charles White, a retrospective, has been traveling since last year, first at the Art Institute of Chicago in the summer, recently at the Museum of Modern Art, and just about to open, I think, next week at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The painter, printmaker, and muralist Charles White also took photographs. As photography scholar Deborah Willis sees it, he trained his lens on things he held dear: activism, urban scenes, portraits of friends and loved ones. Though seemingly casual 3 by 4.5-inch machine process snapshots, his compositions are thoughtful and purposeful. Included in White's photographic archive from the 1950s that has recently come to light are images of his mother, Etheline Gary Marsh. Dressed stylishly in a soft blouse and touches of jewelry, she is comfortably ensconced on a sofa. Light from a window bathes her face, though she doesn't seem to look out, but be compelled by her own thoughts, a theme in many of White's depictions of women from this decade. Indeed, by the middle of the 20th century, Charles White had turned his focus primarily to studies of women. The artist's interests stemmed from critical ideas that centered on Black working women as vanguard and particularly domestics. In these formulations, White would have seen his mother, Etheline Gary Marsh, who as a teen made her way from Vicksburg, Mississippi, to the streets of Chicago, alone, to a continuing life of household service. Such women could certainly be found in White's ebullient workers of the 1950s. As Willis alerts us, his photographs share these interests. In The Woman Near Newsstand, which you also see on the screen on the right, a woman on a Harlem street corner rests briefly between a newspaper kiosk and a subway entrance. Weighted with grocery bags, she makes her way home after a long workday, embodying, in many ways, the experience of White's mother, the first person to encourage his art making. A 1951 show, White's third solo in New York's ACA galleries, has gone down in history as a storied first in which images of women form a central focus. All 15 works, an almost equal mix of paintings, prints, and drawings, centered on the female form. They come to us in groups, comforting children as partners with men, and also very much involved in their thoughts and dreams and creativity, something quite unique for Black women in Western art, as Robin Cost-Lewis has just told us. White's interest in music is seen here too. In the lush painting Bessie Smith, 1950, we note the warmth of the palette and the room of floating wallpaper details. The blues queen is not singing open-mouthed, humming maybe, but she is lost in thought, imagining. Gospel singers, 1951, like Bessie Smith, is also a tempera painting whose surface vibrates with color. A guitar-playing duo is the major interest of the work, but in a telling compositional move, the woman whose figure dominates the picture is seen from the back, draped in a red dress, like Bessie, that falls lovingly over her body, her beautiful, strong arm grasping her instrument. As with Bessie Smith, she is wrapped in her thoughts, composing an intent, focused on her sound. The group of works seen in the 1951 ACA show are also a measure of what White had absorbed as an artist over the last decade. his travels to the southern US documenting farmers, laborers, and others at work, his sojourn to Mexico and conversation with the muralists, his move to more lifelike renderings like theirs was thoughtful and intentional. One painting from the show is perhaps most emblematic of such ideas. Our Land, 1951, is another tempera painting, flush with color. Here, too, we find a central female figure, but this time she regards us, head at a jaunty and confident angle. One hand rests sassily on her hip. With the other, she holds a proper pitchfork. From its image to its title, Our Land is also American regionalism redux. White's pitchfork-wielding and self-assured beauty is in conversation with the dour couple of Grant Wood's American Gothic of 1930. In White's work, woman is an active agent, her tool held firmly in hand and at an angle energizing the panel. She is framed by the doorway of her home, whose open door leads us further back into space. In Wood's piece, stasis is modeled in strict geometries, the upright couple hemmed in by their boxy home and farm building in the distance. The somber matriarch framed by her apron is a contrast to White's woman buoyantly controlling her labor and destiny. Wood's piece was acquired by the Art Institute of Chicago the year it was created, and would certainly have been known by White, a Chicagoan who also attended school there in the late 1930s. You know where this is going, right? While undoubtedly in conversation with Wood, White's Our Land is also in dialogue with another artist, White's friend Gordon Parks, and his searing reframing of American Gothic as a 1942 photograph. Friends from Chicago's WPA networks, including the Southside Community Art Center, Parks immortalized their history there in an iconic portrait, 1940 portrait, in front of one of White's early murals, now lost, and we've seen this earlier. And it's upstairs or across the hall. Parks's American Gothic springs from his first series for the Washington, D. Farm Security Administration, among the last vestiges of WPA programs. The series follows the life of Ella Watson, one of the countless charwomen who kept the Capitol's halls of government spotless. While this image became iconic, with Ms. Watson holding a broom and a mop and framed by the American flag, it was part of a much larger consideration. Seeing her at home with family and in church, defined outside the lowest rungs of labor's ladder. And these are some of the images that also Dr. Harvey was just talking about. Both Parks and White, however, reveal Black women as workers, people making the country run. Ella Watson's mop and broom as much tools as White's woman with pitchfork, something usually both unseen and unacknowledged in art. As we see, Charles White was not the only African-American artist of his time fascinated by the Black woman at work and at leisure. He found a cohort in individuals like Gordon Parks, along with Robert H. McNeill and Ernest Critchlow. For one of his first professional photo series in 1937, Washington, D.C.-based Robert H. McNeill also centered Black women's lives. He trained his camera on domestic workers at New York City's so-called Bronx slave market, following one Bessie Winston from the long wait on the corner of 170th Street and Walton Avenue in the Bronx to an employer's kitchen. On these Bronx streets and other locales such as Coney Island in Brooklyn, women, predominantly Southern Black migrants, waited on street corners to be picked up for day labor. In a crisis exacerbated by the Depression, they were compensated with minimal wages and sometimes barely paid at all. White's friend Ernest Critchlow was another male artist who contributed to what we can consider ongoing feminist conversations. His lithograph Lovers of 38 takes as its theme the same population of women who came north seeking relief from Southern exigencies. The lithograph shows the violent rape of a Black woman at the hands of a Ku Klux Klan member. The work's title is ironic, more broadly revealing the violence that Black women faced literally and figuratively in a sexist and racist world. If Critchlow's print is cited in the South, White himself gives this reality a northern face in his watercolor Kitchenette Debutantes, 1939. With a careening angle and bird's eye view, it is one of White's few paintings that uses nudity. Exposed breasts signal availability, while flashy earrings and a mirror call our attention to the work of beauty and desirability done also before an open window. Sex work was viable labor for Black women recently arrived in white Chicago and other northern cities, particularly migrants with few skills besides those of sharecropping and household labor. The turn to images of women by Charles White from mid-century on was not random. In fact, he was in direct dialogue with Black feminists and the discourse of Black left feminism that developed from the 20s to the 50s. His work was not just about women, but was made in dialogue with activists, artists, and writers like Claudia Jones, Elizabeth Catlett, Esther Cooper Jackson, and Marvell Cook. Nurtured in part in Communist Party USA and Popular Front circles, it was a standpoint that spoke to the centrality of working class Black women to struggles both national and international, recognizing their oppression through the triadic structures of race, class, and gender. Beginning with her days as an organizer with the Southern Negro Youth Congress in the 1940s and membership in the CPUSA, Esther Cooper Jackson was important in Black leftist circles in the 1980s as the managing editor of the journal Freedom Ways. White certainly knew Jackson, as his work appeared in the journal throughout its 25 years of existence. There is even a special issue edited by Jackson dedicated to the artist after his death. It was in her MA thesis in sociology from Fisk University in 1940 where Cooper Jackson initially presented her major thoughts on the role of Black working women as vanguard, whose position in the larger society was a true gauge of democracy. In The Negro Woman Domestic Worker, she focused on the efforts of these workers to organize a union, and that was the title of her MA thesis. This allowed her to examine the pitiable working conditions for Black women in the US. Included was a discussion of the horrors of the so-called Bronx slave market, where, quote, girls are shipped up in carloads from the South to stand on corners waiting for work for 25 to 35 cents per hour, end quote, as day laborers. Cooper Jackson's thesis was also in conversation with others. She anticipated the work of Claudia Jones, the renowned CPUSA leader, whose article, An End to the Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman of '49, had significant impact. Jones refashioned the Marxist-Leninist concept of superexploitation to account for Black women's uniquely severe, persistent, and dehumanizing form of capitalist exploitation. In this political economy, Black women's labor is assumed. It is there to service the entire society for the lowest return. However, as the triply oppressed by race, sex, and class, Black women were thus the true vanguard of world transformation. We also shouldn't ignore the impact that White's first wife, artist Elizabeth Catlett, surely had on him in this regard, given that her work explored the Black female form over a decades-long career. And this is from her The Negro Woman series that you see on the screen, which in a longer version of this talk had a text to it which describes all of the images, but you can see all the workers here, the different types of work that women are doing. And again, we can see this conversation that's also picked up by White, and these are done in 1946-47. In addition to Catlett, White also was also in conversation with Marvel Cook, a neighbor at 409 Edgecombe Avenue when White and Catlett lived in Harlem in the early 40s. Cook was a journalist who covered cultural topics, including visual art, for the New York Amsterdam News. However, she is probably best known for her exposés on the Bronx slave market. Cook wrote what might be her earliest article on the topic for the NAACP's Crisis magazine in 1935 with co-author Ella Baker, who became renowned for her civil rights activism in the 1950s and 60s. Cook reprised such serial coverage for the Daily Compass when the Bronx slave market reasserted itself in the early 50s. More than her work in the 30s, these articles were written in the first person and accompanied by pictures of Cook, presumably undercover, performing household tasks. These were followed by extended articles on prostitution and teen narcotics abuse. For Cook, all these stories led back to the structural racism and inequity embedded in American capitalism. For Charles White, women were the ultimate figures whose bodies signified the makings of the modern. They were emblems of migration, of the exigencies of labor. He dedicated his work to their travails, but most of all, celebrated their beauty. Thank you.